I'm going to give you some awesome training tools to really get familiar and super accurate with the Nock to It release. This is such an awesome release, and honestly, this little two-finger release is what I owe so much of my career to in archery. And I want to first tell you that for honestly, the best part of my archery career as a competitor, I had to work full-time as well, and I was traveling on the different tours utilizing vacation and dock time, so I just didn't have a lot of time to shoot. And what I did have is the ability to train without going to the range, and some of these basic principles that I'll show you first really were the nucleus to me learning proper shot technique and proper execution on the target. Don't feel like you have to go to the range, because honestly, the more variables you add in to learning the release, which honestly, when it comes to any archer, their level of where they are at for accuracy or in their career, it really all boils down to what is their ability to control their trigger at the same time that they're controlling that pin on the target. If you don't have control of the pin, it's going to be a long day. If you don't have control of your release, honestly, some of those days are even longer. So I want to be able to go through some easy principles that are going to teach you control, but more importantly, they're going to reinforce the types of foundational blocks that you need to be a great archer. I have shot trainers. I use one all the time. I travel with it, and I'm going to go through some very simple and basic things that's going to not only get you more familiar with your thumb activated release, but it's also going to allow you to go through reps and reps and reps without having the dynamic force pulling against you with a bow. Now, you certainly need to learn to master this with a bow, and if you're 100% comfortable shooting a handheld release, then I would definitely encourage you to utilize some of these tips as well with your bow and not necessarily with the string. Now, one of the things that I do is called touch and goes. Touch and goes are such an important thing to practice, because when it comes to a handheld release, once that bow stops, where you anchor and how you bring your thumb and present to the trigger is going to have so much importance on whether that shot's easy or whether that shot's hard. If your anchor's incorrect, then your head position is going to feel weird. You're going to either have to go way forward to your string, or you're going to feel like you're looking back behind the string. So the anchor position is going to be critical, but then how you move your thumb to that trigger is going to also be important. So for this drill, touch and goes, I'm going to have you do two things. First, I'm going to have you hold your release just like this, where it's straight up and down and your thumb barrel's down here, and I'm going to have you put a mark on that thumb barrel right at 5 o'clock. The next thing I'm going to have you do is I'm going to have you take your thumb, and I want you to bend your thumb, and right where the main crack of that thumb is, I'm going to have you put another mark, just like that. Now that you have those two marks, you don't even really need to have the string right now to practice. All you really have to do is take your left hand, if you're a right-handed archer, and grab the head of that release. And I want you to think about when you draw your bow back and it stops, and then once you've anchored, where do you bring your thumb to that trigger? So this is called presentation. How you present your thumb to that trigger. This is so important because this trigger works off leverage. Think of it like a crowbar. If you're trying to pry something with a crowbar If one time you grab it all the way down towards the bottom of the handle and you're trying to push, it's going to take way more force than if you're to the back of that. So where you shape this trigger and where your pressure is pushing on this trigger is going to instantly decide whether this trigger goes off harder or whether it goes off easier. So presentation is so critical. So having these two lines like this are going to be an awesome drill for you to learn to present the same every time. One of the things I want to repeat, I know I've talked about this in some other videos, the Nock Tuits come preset with the thumb position and the pressure exactly how I personally shoot it, but also how I like to coach people to shoot it. So hopefully you're in those positions, because this drill is going to be awesome for you to understand your presentation and your shape and how that translates to how easy or difficult that shot goes off. So you can either do this drill by holding the front of your casing and pulling against yourself, or if you do have a piece of D-loop or a shot trainer, you can do the same thing. So I'm going to hold this release the same as if I was anchored with it, but I'm going to look at it because I want to be able to see and feel at the same time. If you're only working on your shot like this, you can't really see what's going on. So for example, right here, if I do this, you can see these two marks are off. What you want to do is you want to learn to take your thumb, lower it without changing the shape of your hand, lower it, align those marks, and then relax the tip of your thumb to where it then shapes this barrel without activation. So this is presentation. Think of it like touch and goes, just for a pilot that's just practicing getting those wheels there, lifting back up. So you're going to draw back, pretend like your bow stops, pretend like you're coming to your anchor. Now you're going to keep your hand in the same position, but you're going to move that thumb over and present the lines. Honestly, this little drill right here helps you over time put concrete into your mind of what that barrel should feel like. And what you want is you want the barrel to touch right in the pocket of your thumb where it bends. So we're going to align those two lines just like that. Then what we're going to do is go ahead and relax the tip of that thumb so that it shapes. But it shapes without setting it off. Obviously, if you put it there and you round it like that and you're building pressure on the front, it can go off, it can fire. But if you can present and shape without it firing, well, now you've properly executed preload to the release. So preload is how much pressure or shape you're putting on that trigger without it going off. If sometimes you have none and you're just sitting here like this and you're pulling your guts out and it's not going off, well, that's going to be a struggle. If you learn to shape without it going off, well, now a little bit more pull of the tip of that elbow to the back wall with that thumb shaped, you're going to have proper execution without having to move your thumb. One of the things that leads to target panic and leads to anxiety in anticipation of the shot is when your thumb is feeling movement. Travel translates to target panic. I've seen it thousands of times through my career. If anyone is feeling the movement, eventually the brain begins to understand how much of that happens before the shot goes off. So for this, learning these touch and goes, where we're drawing back, anchoring, bringing that thumb to the position, shaping it, it's shaped. I'm not adding any more pressure, it's just shaped. Now, once I'm aiming and I'm pulling my elbow behind me, this shot is going off. If you look right here, if I shape properly and I pull, you can see that trigger moving without me moving my thumb. When you can learn that, you are learning one of the most critical components to a thumb-activated trigger and a surprise shot. Learn to present, learn to shape, and then learn to pull and move that trigger without moving your thumb. So these touch and goes for thumb presentation and preload are so important. And remember, it's just like anything you learn. Reps are your best friend. You have to just ingrain reps and reps and reps to where the subconscious and the feel becomes secondary. Okay, now the next touch and go exercise we're going to work on is going to be touch and goes with your anchor position and your face. So with a handheld release, specifically the Nock to it, it's going to create a separation between your index finger and your middle finger. And that separation right there is actually what your jawline is going between. Index fingers at the bottom of that jaw, middle fingers in the cheek well. One of the things people do and get in a poor habit of with a handheld release is changing their head position, drawing back, and coming underneath with this rear hand, or having a fist coming underneath and then having to bring the head down, and you can see skin piling up right here, which is then going to be problematic for arrow flight because now you've got skin, tissue, pressure on the string and the arrow shaft. So what I teach people is to learn to raise their bow to the target, draw till the bow stops, and then bring the release over to the face. So when my bow's at rest and I'm drawing back, I'm thinking of this V coming into the position right here so that this thing is getting loaded and cocked right into the proper position without me having to change my head position. I don't want to do this and then this. And the more you round your hand and the more you round your fist, the more uncomfortable this is going to be on the side of your face. So what you'll end up doing is shortening the elbow or the front shoulder and tucking that fist behind the jaw, which is going to be problematic because it's going to lower the arrow on the face. You're going to have arrow shaft interference with the chin, and you're now going to have pressure on the string, and it's going to cause improper arrow flight. So learning to look to the target, draw till it stops, and come over. I'm literally bringing that V right to the jawline, and now I can take my thumb, present, shape, aim, trust the float, pull, and my shot's going to go off really, really nice. So just learning to draw, stop, come over to your face. Draw, stop, come over to your face. This little movement is so important because what it does is it actually, when you come over to the face, it now brings this rear elbow into a position that allows this rear arm to be parallel to the front, and this small movement of this now actually preloads the part of our back that helps us build that pressure with the rear elbow to the wall behind. So you have touch and goes, both with your thumb and your presentation, as well as your shape and your preload. You have touch and goes when it comes to drawing, stopping, and coming over to your anchor, stop, come over to your anchor, and getting that rear elbow into the position. And when you're comfortable with that, draw, stop, come over. Now you can incorporate both. So now you're going to present you're going to shape, the release hasn't gone off, and now you're going to slowly pull the elbow to the wall behind you. So the last part of this drill is going to be understanding rear pressure. So what I tell people is constantly I'm talking about the tip of the rear elbow. So why is that? Again, this kind of goes back to the crowbar situation. When it comes to activation and building pressure, leverage is everything. So if your focus is on the hand, then usually what happens is you're so focused on the hand, you're focused on building pressure here. You're not actually building pressure here. So when people are thinking about trigger pressure and how much pressure they need to get the release to go off, or how much pressure they shouldn't have so it doesn't go off, then all this starts to get tight, it starts to get static, and in the end, people end up just making the shot go off by squeezing the hand instead of properly pulling through. So what I tell people is, if you have the tip of your elbow, and I've actually taken a scale, and I've taken just a typical scale from the bathroom, I've mounted it on a wall, and I've had people draw back and put their elbows against that scale, and I say, okay, now build 3 pounds of pressure on that scale. And people are surprised that when you back up and you actually put your elbow on something, how easy it is to build 3 pounds when you're thinking about the tip of that elbow just pushing on that scale. It seems easy. Well, that's exactly what you need to do with the shot, and that's what I visualize. But if people start to focus on the hand, if people start to collapse in the front end, and then they're trying to pull and they're trying to literally build pressure, but then they're giving it back with all this collapsing, just ends up becoming a disaster, and you end up having a terrible shot. So focus on your posture, focus on your technique, draw back till the bow stops, bring that release hand over to your anchor, get that elbow up, work on presentation, shaping, now tip of the elbow, pulling and pushing against that scale just enough to where you can build a few extra pounds. That's all it takes, because think of this trigger and how much it takes for that trigger to go off. If your thumb is properly shaped and that trigger is moving from your pulling motion, what I'm doing right now is all it takes to activate, then you are going to learn a surprise shot very quickly, and then all you have to do is embrace just trusting your pin floating around that target. My pin is never dead still. I trust it moving around. If it's moving around good, that's good. I know that I'm building pressure, and I know that I'm working through my shot. If I'm static, I know that my groups are not going to be as tight, just freezing and being in a static position and waiting or shaping, versus continually building a little bit of pressure and having that go off. So once I've practiced those things, I'm going to grab my bow and I'm going to work on this. Now, one of the things I want to close with here is, don't be afraid to work on this close. I work on this close, and honestly, like I said, the best times of my career, I had a string and I had a bail inside of 10 yards that I had to shoot. My times in Europe, I could only shoot from the living room into the kitchen. And I focused on execution. The groups will come if you're executing the shot. Raising the bow to the target, draw back, the bow stopped, I'm bringing it over, looking through my peep, I'm presenting, shaping, now I'll trust the float and start to pull. Depending on your preload and depending on the speed of your pull or your building of the pressure of that rear elbow will determine the speed of this arrow. So if you're shooting an uphill shot, it's really awesome to learn, maybe I need to present and have a little bit more on it because I know this shot's going to be hard, and that way once I'm starting my pull, it's going to be able to go off a little bit easier. But having a perfectly surprise shot and a very dynamic shot is really just going to come from these easy principles, these easy training regimens. Draw back, touch and go, touch and go. Now the rear elbow, pulling, pulling, pulling through.